had a rough night, haven't we, guys?
I mean, I've only been out for like 6 hours, so.
And there's that. But we're gonna read now, and it'll be fine. Dragon man, between thee and thine, share me that glimpse of love greater than mine. Miriam roused Manoli early the next morning, impatiently shushing the fire lizards who hissed at her rough shaking of their mistress. Manoli, wake up! We need every hand in the kitchen. The eggs will hatch today and half of Pern's invited. Turn over, Menora's coming to look at your feet. Ouch, you're too rough. Tell Beauty, ouch, I'm not hurting you. Beauty, behave or I'll tell Ramoth. To Manoli's surprise, Beauty stopped diving at Miriam and retreated with a squeak to the far corner of the room. You were hurting me, said Manoli, too sleepy to be tactful. Well, I said I was sorry. Your feet really do look a lot better. We won't use such heavy bandages today, said Minora, entering at that moment. The slippers give enough protection. Manoli craned her head about as she felt Minora's strong, gentle fingers turn first one foot and then the other. Yes, lighter bandages today, Miriam, and salve. Tonight, no bandages at all. Wounds must have fresh air too, you know. But you've done a good job. The fire lizard eggs are fine this morning, Manoli. With that she left, and Miriam quickly set about dressing the feet. When she'd finished, and Manoli rose to put on her clothes, her fingers lingering in the soft folds of the overshirt, Miriam sank onto the bed with an exaggerated sigh. What's the matter with you? Manoli asked. I'm getting all the rest I can while I can, Miriam replied. You don't know what a hatching is like, with all those holders and crafters stumbling about the weir, poking here and there where they're not supposed to be, and getting scared of and scaring the dragons and the weirlings and the hatchlings. And the way they eat! Miriam rolled her eyes expressively. You'd think they'd never seen food, and... Miriam flopped over on the bed and started to sob wildly. Miriam, what's the matter? Oh, it's Brecky. Isn't she all right? I mean, won't she re-impress? Sandra said that's what Lessa hoped. Manoli bent to comfort her friend, herself upset by those heart-rending sobs. Miriam's words were garbled by her weeping, although Manoli gathered that Miriam didn't want her foster mother to re-impress, and the reason was obscure. Brecky didn't want to live, and they had to find some way to make her. Losing her dragon was like losing half herself, and it hadn't been Brecky's fault. She was so gentle and sensible, and she loved Fnor, and for some reason that was unwise too. Manoli just let Miriam cry, knowing how much relief she had felt the day before when she'd wept, and hoping deep in her heart that there might be joyful tears too for Miriam later that day. There had to be. She forgave Miriam all her little poses and attitudes, aware that that was how Miriam had masked her intense anxiety and grief. There was a rattling of the cubicle's curtain, a squabble of fire lizard protest, and then Miriam's Tolly crawled under the curtain, his eyes whirling with indignation and worry. He saw Manoli stroking Miriam's hair and, raising his wings, made as if to launch himself at her when Beauty warbled sharply from the corner. Tully sort of shook his wings, but when he leapt to the bed, he landed gently on the edge and remained there, his eyes first on Miriam, then on Manoli. A moment later, the two Greens entered. They settled themselves on the stool, watchful, but not obtrusive. Beauty, in her corner, kept an eye on them all. Miriam! Miriam! It was Sandra's voice from the living cavern. Miriam, haven't you finished Manoli's feet yet? We need both of you, now! As Manoli rose obediently, Miriam caught her hand and squeezed it. Then she rose, shook her skirts out, and marched from the cubicle, Manoli following more slowly behind her. Miriam had by no means exaggerated the amount of work to be done. It was just past sunrise, but obviously the main cooks had already been up for hours, judging by the breads, sweet, spiced, and sour, cooling on long benches. Two weirmen were trussing a huge herd beast for the main spit, and at the smaller hearths, wild berries were being cleaned and stuffed for roasting later. For added protection in the busy kitchen, someone had placed the small table over her fire lizard egg basket. They were doing fine, the sand nice and warm all around. Felina caught sight of her, told her to feed herself quickly from the sauce hearth, and did she know anything flavorful to do with dried fish, or would she prefer to help pare roots? Manoli instantly elected to cook fish, so Felina asked what ingredients she'd need. Manoli was a little dismayed to learn the quantity she'd have to prepare. She had had no idea that so many people came to a hatching. The number coming was more than lived at Half Circle Sea-Hold. The knack in making the fish stew tasty was in the long baking, so Manoli applied herself to prepare the huge pots quickly, to give them enough time to simmer into succulence. She did so with such dispatch that there were still plenty of roots left to pare. Excitement filled the air of the kitchen cavern. The mound of root vegetables in front of Manoli melted away as she listened to the chatter of the other girls and women. There was great speculation as to which of the boys, and the girls for the queen egg, would impress the dragons to be hatched that day. "No one has ever re-impressed a dragon," said one woman wistfully. "Do you think Brekkie will?" "No one's ever been given the chance before." "Is it a chance we should take?" asked someone else. "We weren't asked," said Sandra, glaring at the last speaker. "It's Les's idea. But it wasn't Fnor's or Minora's." "Something has to help her," said the first woman. "It tears my heart to see her lying there, just lying like the undead. I mind me of the way Dinmal went. He sort of, faded completely away." "If you'll finish that root quickly, we can put this kettle on," said Sandra, briskly rising. "Will all of this be eaten?" asked Manoli of the woman beside her. "Yes, indeed, and there'll be some looking for more," she said with a complacent smile. "Impression days are good days. I've a fosterling and a blood son on the hatching ground today," she added with understandable pride. "Sandra," she turned her head to shout over her shoulder, "just one more largish kettle will take what's left." Then white roots had to be sliced finely, covered with herbs and placed in clay pots to bake. The succulent odors of Manoli's fish concoction aroused compliments from Felina, who was in charge of the various hearths and ovens. Then Manoli, who was told to keep off her poor feet, helped decorate the spice cakes. She giggled with the rest when Sandra distributed pieces of one cake about, saying they had to be certain the bake had turned out well, didn't they? Manoli did not forget to turn the fire lizard eggs, or to feed her friends. Beauty stayed within sight of Manoli, but the others had been seen bathing in the lake and sunning themselves, scrupulously avoiding Ramoth, whose bugles punctuated the morning. "She's always like that on Impression Day," Tagellin told Manoli as he grabbed a quick bite to eat at her table. "Say, will you get your fire lizards to hum along with you again this evening? I've been called a liar because I said you taught them to sing. They might turn difficult and shy in front of a lot of people, you know." "Well, we'll wait till things get quiet and then we'll give it a try, huh? Now, I'm to see you get to the hatching. Mid-afternoon, I'd say, so be ready." As it happened, she wasn't. She felt the thrumming before she heard it. She and everyone else in the cavern stopped working as one by one they became aware of the intensely exciting noise. Manoli gasped because she recognized it as the same sort of sound the fire lizards had made when their eggs had hatched. There was suddenly no time for her to return to her cubicle and change. Tagellin appeared at the cavern entrance, gesturing urgently to her. She made as much speed as her feet would permit because she could see Monarth waiting outside the entrance. Tagellin had already taken her hand when she exclaimed over the cooking stains and wet marks on her overshirt. "I told you to be ready." "I'll put you in a corner, pet. Not that anyone will notice stains today," Tagellin reassured her. A trifle resentful, Manoli noticed that he was dressed in new dark trousers, a handsomely overstitched tunic, a belt worked with metal and jewels, but she didn't resist. "I have to get you in place first because I'm to collect some visitors," Tagellin said, climbing nimbly into place in front of her on Monarch's neck ridges, Flars filling the hatching ground with anyone who'll ride a dragon between. Monarch was a wing, slanting up from the bowl floor to an immense opening high up on the weir wall, which Manoli had not noticed before. Other dragons were angling toward it too. Manoli gasped as they entered the mouth, with a dragon before them and one abaft, so close that she had momentary fears of collision. The dark core of the tunnel was lit at the far end, and abruptly they were in the gigantic hatching ground. The whole north quadrant of the weir must be hollow, thought Manoli, awed. Then she saw the gleaming clutch of dragon eggs and gasped. Slightly to one side was a larger egg, and hovering over it was the zealous golden form of Ramoth, her eyes incredibly brilliant with the coming of Impression. Monarch dropped with distressing abruptness, then back-winged to land neatly on a ledge. "Here you are, Manoli, best seat in the ground. I'll be back for you afterwards." Manoli was only too glad to sit still after that incredible ride. She was in the third tier, by the outer wall, so she had a perfect view of the hatching ground and the entrance through which people were beginning to file. They were all so elegantly dressed that she brushed vainly at the stains and crossed her arm over her chest, At least the clothes were new. Other dragons were arriving from the upper entrance, depositing their passengers, often 3 and 4 at a time. She watched the now steady stream of visitors coming in from the ground entrance. It was amusing to watch the elegant and sometimes overdressed ladies having to pick up their heavy skirts and run in awkward little steps across the hot sands. The tears filled rapidly, and the excited thrumming of the dragons increased in pitch, so that Manoli found it difficult to sit quietly. A sudden cry announced the rocking of some of the eggs. Late arrivals began to hurry across the sands, and the seats beyond Manoli were filled with a group of mine craftsmen, to judge from their red-brown tunic devices. She crossed her arms again and then uncrossed them because she had to lean forward to see around the mine craftsmen's stocky bodies. More eggs were rocking, all of them except the smallish gray egg that had somehow got shoved back against the inside wall. Another rush of wings, and this time bronze dragons entered, depositing the girls who were candidates for the queen egg. Manoli tried to figure out which one was Brekkie, but they all looked very aware and healthy. Hadn't the weirwomen remarked that morning how Brekkie just lay like someone dead? The girls formed a loose but incomplete semicircle about the queen egg, while Ramoth hissed softly behind it. Young boys marched in now from the bowl, their expressions purposeful, their shoulders straight in the white tunics as they approached the main clutch. Manoli did not see Brekkie's entrance because she was trying to figure out which of the violently rocking eggs would hatch first. Then one of the miners exclaimed and pointed toward the entrance, to the slender figure stumbling, halting, then moving onward, apparently insensitive to the hot sands underfoot. That would be the one. That would be Brekkie, he told his comrades. Dragon Rider said she'd be put to the egg. Yes, thought Manoli, she walks as if she's asleep. Then Manoli saw Minora and a man she didn't recognize standing by the entrance, as if they had done all they could in bringing Brekkie to the hatching ground. Suddenly, Brekkie straightened her shoulders with a shake of her head. She walked slowly but steadily across the sands to join the 5 girls who waited by the golden egg. One girl turned and gestured for her to take the space that would complete the semicircle. The humming ceased so abruptly that a little ripple of reaction ran through those assembled. In the expectant silence, the faint crack of a shell was clear, and the pop and shatter of others. First one dragonette, then another. Awkward, ugly, glistening creatures flopped and rolled from their casings, squawking and creeling, their wedge-shaped heads too big for the thin, sinuous, short necks. Manoli noticed how very still the boys were standing, as stunned as she'd been in that very little cave with those tiny fire lizards crawling from their shells, voracious with hunger. Now the difference became apparent. The fire lizards had expected no help at their hatching. Their instinct was to get food into their churningly empty stomachs as fast as possible. But the dragons looked expectantly about them. One staggered beyond the first boy, who sidestepped its awkward progress. It fell, nose first, at the feet of a tall, black-haired boy. The boy knelt, helped the dragonette balance on his shaky feet, looked into the rainbow eyes. Emotion like a fist squeezed Manoli's heart. Yes, she'd her fire lizards, but to impress a dragon. Startled, she wondered where Beauty, Rocky, and Diver and the others were. She missed them acutely, wanted Beauty's affectionate nuzzling, even the choke-tight twist of the little queen's tail about her neck. The crack of the golden egg was a summons for all attention to be centered on it. The egg split right down the center, and its inmate, protesting her abrupt birth, fell to the sand on her back. 3 of the girls moved to assist it. They got the little queen to her 4 legs and then stepped back. Manoli held her breath as they all turned towards Brekkie. She was unaware of anything. Whatever strength had sustained her to walk across the sands had now left her. Her shoulders sagged pathetically, her head listed to one side as if too heavy to hold upright. The queen dragonette turned her head towards Brekkie, the glistening eyes enormous in the outsized skull. Brekkie shook her head as if aware of the scrutiny. The dragonette lurched forward 1 step. Manoli saw a bronze blur out of the corner of her right eye, and for an unnerving moment thought it must be Diver. But it couldn't be, because the little bronze just hung above the dragonette's head, screaming defiantly. He was so close to her head that she reared back with a startled shriek and bit at the air, instinctively spreading her wings forward as protection for her vulnerable eyes. Dragons bugled warnings from their perches at the top of the hatching ground, and Ramoth spread her wings, rising to her haunches as if to strike at the invader. One of the girls interposed her body between the queen and her small attacker. "Bird, don't!" Brecky, too, moved.
Wait, Mom, look at the sky.
It's pretty, huh? Move, honey.
Okay.
Brecky, too, moved, her arm extended toward the irate bronze. The dragonette queen creeled and hid her face in the girl's skirt. The two women faced each other for a moment, tense, worried. Then the other stretched her hand out to Brecky, and Manoli could see her smile. The gesture lasted only a moment because the young queen butted imperiously, and the girl knelt, her arms reassuringly encircling the dragonette's shoulders. At the same instant, Brecky turned, no longer a somnolent figure immersed in grief. She walked back to the entrance of the cavern, the little bronze fire lizard whirring round her head, making noises that went from scolding to entreaty, just like Beauty when Manoli had done something that had upset her. Manoli didn't realize that she was weeping until the tears dropped onto her arms. She glanced hastily to see if the miners had noticed, but they were concentrating on the main clutch. From their comments, it seemed that a boy had been found on search in one of their craft holds, and they were impatiently waiting for him to impress. For a fleeting moment, Manoli was angry with them. Hadn't they seen Brecky's deliverance? Didn't they realize how marvelous that was? Oh, think how happy Miriam would be. Manoli sank wearily back against the stones, depleted by the emotionally laden miracle, and the look on Brecky's face as she passed under the arched entrance. Minora was there, her face radiant, her arms outstretched in a joyful gesture. The man, who was surely Fnor, swept Brecky up in his arms, his tired face mirroring his relief and gladness. A cheer from the miners beside her indicated that their lad had impressed, although Manoli couldn't be certain which of the boys he was. There were so many now paired off with wobbly-legged hatchlings, all creeling with hunger, lurching and falling toward the entrance. The miners were urging their favorite on, and when a curly-haired, skinny lad passed by with a grin for their cheering, she saw that he had done rather well, impressing a brown. When the exultant miners turned to her to share their triumph, she managed to respond properly, but she was relieved when they scrambled down the tiers to follow the pair out of the hatching ground. She sat there, glowing over the resurgence of Brecky, the determination and fierceness of Bronze Bird, his courage in braving Ramoth's ire at such a moment. Now why, Manoli wondered, didn't Bird want Brecky to impress the new queen? At all events, the experiment had successfully roused Brecky from her lethargy. The dragons were returning, landing in the hatching ground so that their riders could help the weirlings or to escort guests outside. The tiers were emptying. Soon there was only a man in holder colors on the first tier with two boys. The man looked as tired as she felt. Then one of the boys rose, pointing to the little egg on the sand that wasn't even rocking. Idly, Manoli thought that it might not hatch, remembering the uncracked egg left in the fire lizard's sand nest the morning after her fire lizards had hatched. She had shaken it and something hard had rattled within. Sometimes hold babies were born dead, so she supposed that it could happen to other creatures too. The boy was running along the tier now. To Manoli's astonishment, he jumped to the hatching ground and began kicking at the little egg. His cries and his actions attracted the notice of the weir leader and the small knot of candidates who had not impressed. The holder half rose, one hand extended in a cautionary gesture. The other boy was shouting at his friend. "Jackson, what are you doing?" shouted the weir leader. The egg fractured then, and the boy began tearing at the shell, ripping out sections and kicking until Manoli could see the small body pushing at the thick inner membrane. Jackson cut at the membrane with his belt knife, and a small white body, not much larger than the boy's torso, fell from the sack. The boy reached out to help the creature to his feet. Manoli saw the little white dragon lift his head, his eyes, brilliant with greens and yellows, fastened on the boy's face. "He says his name is Ruth," the boy cried in amazed delight. With a strangled exclamation, the older man sank back to the stone seat, his face a mask of grief. The weir leader and the others who had rushed to prevent what had just occurred halted. To Manoli, it was all too obvious that Jackson's impression of the little white dragon was unprecedented and unwelcome, and she couldn't imagine why. The boy and the dragon looked so radiant, Who could deny them their joyous union? That's the end of the chapter.